What would you do if two men in police uniforms showed up at your door, slapped handcuffs on you, and dragged you away in front of your neighbors all while your HOA president stood there smiling like she had just won the lottery? That's exactly what happened to me. And if you stay with me through this story, I'll tell you how I went from being dragged off in fake cuffs to putting that same HOA president behind bars for one of the biggest fraud schemes my city had ever seen. But to understand how it all went down, we need to go back to the beginning. After 20 years on the police force, 15 on SWAT, and my last 5 as chief, I finally decided it was time to step away from the sirens, the late-night calls, and the endless paperwork. I bought myself what I thought would be a slice of peace and quiet, a home on Oak Street. It was everything I wanted. Big oak trees lining the sidewalks, kids riding their bikes up and down the street, the smell of fresh-cut grass drifting through the neighborhood on Saturday mornings. For 3 weeks, it felt like I had finally found a place where nothing and no one could disturb me. 3 weeks. That's all it took for the dream to crack. One morning, I walked out to my truck and found a bright red slip of paper flapping under the windshield wiper. Violation notice. Fine, $50. Reason, grass exceeding allowable height by 1/4 inch. I actually laughed. My grass wasn't even long. I had mowed it 2 days before. But at the bottom, in fancy cursive, was the signature. Karen Van Vliet, president of Oak Street, HOA. Now, here's the kicker. When I bought the house, I specifically checked for HOA restrictions. There weren't any. The realtor told me Oak Street had never been part of a homeowners association. I figured maybe I missed some paperwork. Maybe it was optional. Or maybe there was a new neighborhood association I didn't know about. So instead of throwing the notice away, I kept it. Old habits die hard, and 20 years of police work had taught me that even the smallest paper trail can matter. Death by paper cuts. That red notice wasn't a one-time thing. The next week, another appeared. Trash can left out too long? Fine. $25. 2 days later, noise violation. Fine. $50. By the end of the month, I had 4 separate fines totaling $125. Each one had the same signature. Each one had the same bold heading, Oak Street HOA, and each one came from the same woman, Karen Van Vliet. Now, if you've never met someone like Karen, let me paint the picture. Mid-50s, bleached blonde hair sprayed into a helmet, always in pressed slacks and a crisp blouse. Even when she was just walking her dog, she carried a clipboard like it was an extension of her arm and strutted up and down the street like she owned every square inch of pavement. The first time I saw her, she introduced herself with a smile that didn't touch her eyes and said, "Welcome to Oak Street. I expect you'll keep your property in line with community standards. I don't tolerate slack." I thought she was joking. She wasn't. At first I thought it was just me she was targeting, but when I started chatting with the neighbors, I realized Karen had her claws in everyone. The Martinez family across the street had already paid over $400 in fines for things like basketball hoop placement and improper mailbox height. An elderly widow down the block confessed she was paying dues every month because she was afraid Karen would put a lien on her house. When I asked around, most people said the same thing. We just pay. It's easier than fighting. That's when the cop in me woke up. Something was very wrong. I went down to the county clerk's office and spent the better part of a day pulling records. I wanted to see the incorporation documents for the Oak Street HOA, the bylaws, the filings, anything that proved it existed. But after hours of digging, you know what I found? Nothing. There was no HOA, no incorporation, no filings, no legal recognition of anything called Oak Street HOA. Karen had made the entire thing up. Most people would have just laughed it off, told her to get lost, maybe even posted about it online. But here's the thing. I wasn't just a retired cop. I was a retired police chief. And I knew that people who pull stunts like this rarely stop at small-time harassment. Karen wasn't just a nosy neighbor with a clipboard. She was running a scam. Think about it. She was mailing out fines, collecting cash, intimidating people with threats of liens. She had created a fake government inside our neighborhood, and most of the residents had no idea they were being conned. That's when I decided I wasn't just going to ignore her. I was going to take her down. But I couldn't just walk up to her and accuse her of fraud. She'd deny it, tear up the papers, maybe even target me harder. I needed her to show her full hand. So I set a plan in motion. Cameras went up around my house. I rigged a microphone into my shirt collar. I reconnected with my old lieutenant and had him on speed dial with a panic button app. And I waited, because one thing I knew for sure, if Karen was bold enough to invent an entire HOA out of thin air, she was bold enough to try something even crazier. And when she did, I'd be ready. After weeks of watching Karen strut around Oak Street with her clipboard like she owned the block, I knew she wasn't just a nosy neighbor. She was running a con, a fake HOA, a scam so bold most people didn't even question it. I had the proof in my hands. No record of any Oak Street HOA existed in county files. On paper, it was nothing but smoke and mirrors. But the truth is, people like Karen don't stop when you catch them in a lie. They double down. They push harder. And that's exactly what she did. I needed her to show the full extent of her scheme, and I knew the only way to get it all on record was to set a trap. So I got to work. I installed cameras around my house, teeny ones hidden under the porch roof, tucked between tree branches, even disguised as lawn decorations. I wired a microphone into my shirt collar that connected straight to my phone, and most importantly, I linked a silent panic button to my old lieutenant at the department. If anything went wrong, one tap would bring backup to my exact location. I also spoke with a few trusted neighbors. Many of them were too afraid of Karen to act openly, but when I explained what I was planning, a handful agreed to help. They promised to record from their windows if anything unusual happened. Slowly, the pieces of the net began to fall into place. All I had to do was wait for Karen to make her move. For about a week, things went quiet. The red violation slips stopped appearing. No fines on my windshield, no threats taped to my door. For a moment, I thought maybe the pressure had scared her off. But people like Karen don't disappear that easily. And sure enough, one Saturday morning, there came a heavy knock at my door. When I opened it, two men stood on my porch. At first glance, they looked like police officers. They had uniforms, badges, even radios clipped to their shoulders. But after 20 years in law enforcement, my eye caught the details instantly. Their patches were sewn on crooked, their badges were the wrong shape, the wrong shine, and their belts, cheap knockoffs filled with props that belonged in a Halloween store, not on a real officer. "Mr. Henley," one of them said, "you're under arrest for repeated violations of Oak Street HOA regulations." Behind them, standing in the driveway with her arms folded and a smug grin plastered across her face, was Karen. She didn't say a word, but the message was clear. This was her show. She was the one pulling the strings. And she thought she had finally won. Now, most people in my shoes would have slammed the door or called 911, but I didn't, because I knew this was the moment I had been waiting for. Instead, I raised my hands calmly and let them slap on the cuffs. They were cheap, flimsy things that bit into my wrists too tight. I didn't resist. I walked with them down the porch steps while Karen smirked like she was about to crown herself Queen of Oak Street. What she didn't know was that every second was being recorded. My hidden cameras were capturing everything: the uniforms, the fake badges, the smug look on her face. My microphone was transmitting their words live. My neighbors' phones were pointed right at us from behind curtains. And the second I stepped into their SUV, I tapped the panic button. As the SUV rolled away, I stayed calm. The two fake cops muttered under their breath about processing me at HOA headquarters, which only made me want to laugh. There was no headquarters. There was no HOA. They were just puppets, following Karen's script. But what they didn't realize was that the net was already closing around them. Unmarked cars had been shadowing us from the moment we left my driveway. By the time the SUV pulled into an abandoned industrial park at the edge of town, real law enforcement was already in position. Floodlights snapped on. Engines roared. A semicircle of police cruisers boxed us in, doors flying open as officers shouted commands. "Out of the vehicle, hands where we can see them." The fake cops froze, panic written all over their faces. Within 30 seconds, they were face down on the pavement, their hands zip-tied behind their backs. And just like that, the trap had sprung shut. The SUV turned out to be a goldmine of evidence. In the back seat, we found stacks of violations slip-side and cold to the ones Karen had been posting around Oak Street. In the glove box, bundles of cash wrapped with rubber bands, each labeled with addresses from our street. There were forged badges, fake paperwork, even a folder of official notices, ready to be delivered. But the biggest prize of all was a burner phone, filled with call logs and text messages. Every single one of those messages traced back to Karen. Instructions, schedules, even payment confirmations. She was the one orchestrating everything. She wasn't just harassing neighbors, she was running a full-blown fraud ring. The fake cops didn't hold out long. Faced with felony charges: impersonation, kidnapping, conspiracy, they folded like cheap lawn chairs. They admitted Karen had recruited them, paid them under the table, and promised they'd be protected because she had power in the community. And with that confession, we had enough to take the next step. That evening, we surrounded her house. Through the garage windows, we could see her inside, standing at a podium in front of half a dozen so-called board members. She was lecturing them about collecting dues more aggressively and reminding residents who's in charge. She thought she was untouchable. We let her talk for a few more seconds before breaching the door. The look on her face when real officers stormed in was something I'll never forget. She shouted about her rights, waved her fake HOA badge like it was worth something, and tried to argue that she was protecting the community. But when the cuffs clicked, shut real cuffs this time, the mask finally cracked. For the first time, Karen didn't look smug. She looked terrified. And yet, even then, I didn't realize how big this case would become. Because what we uncovered next wasn't just a neighborhood scam. It was the blueprint of a citywide fraud empire. By the time Karen was hauled out of her garage in handcuffs, most of the neighbors thought the nightmare was over. But as investigators started digging deeper into her finances, the truth turned out to be much darker and much bigger than anyone on Oak Street ever imagined. What started as a small neighborhood scam had ballooned into a citywide operation, and Karen was sitting at the center of it like a self-appointed queen. The burner phone from her fake cops was the first clue. It contained dozens of messages to other enforcers, scheduling collections in neighborhoods across the city. Every text read like something out of a cheap crime drama. Pick up dues, deliver notices, target the mailbox. But there was nothing theatrical about the money trail. Each neighborhood she targeted had been squeezed for thousands of dollars, all funneled into carefully hidden bank accounts. When the Financial Crimes Unit took over, they traced the funds to 5 different accounts spread across 3 banks. The balances were staggering over $500,000 in less than 3 years. It was money stolen, one small fine at a time, from ordinary families who just wanted to live in peace. People who had no idea their HOA wasn't even real, and Karen had built it all on fear, intimidation, and the illusion of authority. As word spread, the phone at the police department lit up. Families from all over the city started coming forward with stories almost identical to mine. Red notices taped to their doors, fake fines for lawn violations, threats of liens if they didn't pay, and in some cases, visits from the same fake officers who had tried to arrest me. It was a web of deceit woven so tightly that most people never thought to question it. After all, who wants to risk losing their home over a few $100s? The district attorney wasted no time. Karen was hit with a laundry list of charges: fraud, racketeering, impersonation, conspiracy, extortion, and even kidnapping for the stunt her enforcers pulled on me. Her so-called board members flipped almost immediately, cutting deals in exchange for lighter sentences. Each one painted the same picture: Karen as the mastermind, pulling every string, pocketing every dollar. The trial was a spectacle. News crews camped outside the courthouse. The words "fake HOA Quinn" splashed across headlines. Neighbors who had once been too scared to even look her in the eye now lined up to testify against her. I took the stand myself, explaining exactly how she had tried to use fear and intimidation to break me. The jury didn't take long. After just 4 hours of deliberation, they returned with guilty verdicts on every single count. When the judge handed down her sentence, the courtroom was silent. 15 years in federal prison, restitution of over $600,000, a lifetime ban from serving on any homeowners association or community board. The moment the gavel fell, I swear I heard half of Oak Street breathe a sigh of relief. For the first time in years, people felt free. The aftermath was just as important as the trial. Every fake lien Karen had filed was voided. Families who had lost money received restitution checks funded by the sale of her assets. Those who had moved away in fear were contacted, offered their refunds with interest, and in some cases even returned to their old homes. The scars of her scheme were deep, but little by little, the neighborhood began to heal. And Oak Street itself, it transformed. Without Karen prowling the sidewalks with her clipboard, people started coming together again. Neighbors who had once whispered their complaints in private now gathered on porches, laughing and sharing stories. Kids played basketball in driveways without worrying about fines. Lawns grew a little longer, but so did the sense of community. It felt like the street had been given a second life. As for me, I stayed put. I wasn't about to let a fraud like Karen chase me away from the home I'd chosen for my retirement. Instead, I framed that very first violation notice, the one about my grass being a quarter inch too high, and hung it in my office. It's a reminder that sometimes the biggest battles don't come from the criminals you expect, but from the people who pretend to have authority they never earned. The story didn't just end on Oak Street, though. State lawmakers took notice too. Within a year, new legislation was passed requiring all HOAs in the state to register with the Attorney General's office and undergo regular audits. No more room for scams, no more room for fakes. Karen's downfall became the catalyst for real change, protecting thousands of families from ever having to face the same nightmare. Even now, when I sit on my porch and watch the neighborhood kids race their bikes down the sidewalk, I can't help but think back to that day when 2 fake cops walked up my driveway. They thought they were about to make me another victim of Karen's empire. Instead, they walked straight into the trap that ended it all. Because in the end, fear only works if people stay silent. And once the truth comes out, no fake badge, no clipboard, and no self-appointed queen can stand against it.